As you are aware that three modules have been covered as of now through the TUT, ITC and their needs, and then ECD related services to create ITC neighborhood, uh, assessment of existing policies and guidelines, and then now today we are going to discuss about importance of data and evidence-based approach in achieving ITC-friendly neighborhoods and cities. So for this TUT, I would like to invite CRDF team to take this session forward. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, KK. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vani, and I'll be, leading this discussion today on data and evidence-based approaches to achieve ITC-friendly neighborhoods. And this is the fourth module in the orientation session. So as we all know, this is the fourth module in the orientation program. The module today, we are going to speak about importance of data and evidence-based approach in achieving ITC-friendly neighborhoods and cities. So just because it's again the last module in this orientation course, a quick recap. Essentially, this capacity building program has been jointly developed by NIUA and BVLF. And the driving force behind this program is that how can we build capacities of government actors so that they can continue to incorporate ITC friendly principles and design ideas into all city level development projects. Essentially, it's going to be in three parts. This one, which is the orientation course, the second course will be the operational course, and the third course will be the implementation course. This course essentially, which we are part of, which is the orientation course, is establishing the need for understanding who is ITC, what are their needs, and giving an overview of basic needs, principles, and data. As we move forward, we will get into the next course will be the operational course, which will be essentially a lot more about how can cities start planning and designing these kinds of ITC friendly projects. And then finally, we'll get into the implementation course, which will go into a further detailed understanding. Again, just a quick recap, since CRDF, as part of CRDF, we are developing this training material. So this training material is also developed with a thinking that how can all of you customize it, tailor it to, train the government officials in your regions and districts. So I think Purvi mentioned this in her, first course. So we just to recap that you have these symbols on slides that will guide you to, tailor this presentation to the needs and incorporate some of the local language, local examples. And also where can we engage government officials in a discussion? Where do we need to emphasize a little bit more about the definitions, technical definitions, etc. Again, we recommend that these modules be kind of, customized to use local examples, to use local case studies, local languages. So today's module, which is essentially how can data drive the thinking about ITC friendly neighborhoods, it's structured in 4 different sections. First, because in the last 10 years we are already seeing a lot of push for data driven decision making. So we'll just establish the context for that how are cities, more and more cities embracing data, and how are they using data for decision making. The second chapter will be essentially on the concept of performance measurement, essentially that how do you collect data with a specific objective of this, as to what is performance measurement, what are the different concepts involved. Then we will get into what is the performance measurement framework for ITCN, right? So if cities have to go ahead and start thinking about and planning ITC friendly neighborhoods, then what is the performance measurement framework that they use? So we will introduce and have a discussion on that. Fourth, we will move on to talking about, once we have this framework, how can cities really go about collecting this data? What will be the sources of these data, etc. and who will be the stakeholders that could be engaged in this data collection. And we will finally end with a brief discussion on key considerations and takeaways. Again, as a guidance that how you all can lead this training with the local government, we can have a 5-minute introduction, which can be a Mentimeter poll, where you invite local officials to kind of talk about which department do they represent. You can also add a question on this particular in this particular module on whether they have worked with data frameworks before, and that will be an interactive way to get some feedback from them. Then we'll get into the section on urban data and decision making, which will be essentially how are cities using data to guide decision making. Then performance measurement, ITCN, performance measurement for ITCN, and then finally ending with a discussion on how can cities go about collecting and managing this data. So first and foremost, we'll just broadly situate this idea of data-based decision making in, where are we today in that entire context. I think it's become very clear in the last few years that, data is one of the most valuable assets for cities to work on, right? And it guides everything from service delivery to planning of amenities and neighborhoods, to also monitoring health. Especially also we saw in the recent pandemic situation, data was critical in identifying which are the hotspots and how can we have immediate action. So essentially, more and more cities, and globally there is a large consensus that we need to really know, cities should know how to use data well, right? And why are we using data? Essentially, we are first and foremost, cities are using data at a very basic level to start enforcing regulations and tax collection, right? So you will see a lot of Indian cities now, we are getting into GIS based, spatial databases so that they can streamline their property taxes, they can mark all the properties, they can have an inventory of all public land, they can have an inventory of all amenities, etc. So at a very basic level, we all know that it's extremely critical to enforce regulations and tax collection. Second, I think we'll also see examples as we move forward. There is a lot of push on using data to improve service delivery, right? So we saw this in the service level benchmarking for water and sanitation project, which a lot of cities across India are embracing. So there is a set of indicators which cities track, and over time, and then you are able to make tailored decisions, where, what to do, where, based on that data, and then to improve service delivery. Third, it is also becoming important to facilitate collaboration. So we have multiple departments in the city. We have the transport department, we have the streets department, parks, gardens. And if we have data-based, like a framework for data-based collaboration and working, then data also helps in facilitate collaboration. And then finally, also a very important aspect is that data also ensures transparency, accountability, and it also gives an opportunity for local governments to engage, with the citizens and residents, right? So it's then here in the fourth point, it becomes a two-way process, that we are also seeking data from people, but we are also making data more accessible and open for people to see and use. I think just some of you would have read yesterday, I think there is one city in China which has invited a lot of volunteers to share their data with the city, right? Everything from sleeping habits to what are they eating, which doctor do they go to, etc. I think it's too far, but then the city is essentially planning to kind of tailor the whole city and living environment around people's data. But that's just an example of how deeply entrenched data has become, and we are really into a data-based economy for cities. So essentially, in India, in the context of India, in the last 5-8 years, we have also seen a lot of push from the national government to kind of encourage this agenda that let's focus on more evidence-based decision making in our cities, right? For a long time, our cities were growing rapidly. We were making changes to our cities based on we were just catching up. But now I think all cities have this realization that we really have to use data. We have to use hard evidences to really start planning ahead and making sure that we are, the decisions are guided by the data. So I think the smart city mission was an excellent, it still is, it has given a lot of impetus to cities to start collecting, analyzing, using data, establish data centers and start, using evidence based approaches to make decisions. Uh, how are Indian cities using? I think some of you know these examples that we have. A lot of cities have command and control centers, which are using, which are monitoring everything from traffic data, transport data, to data about waste collection, management. So that's, it's a good kind of a base to start with, that some cities already are using data for decision making. The next step will be also to look, not so much in India, but I think some of you, when we enter into a discussion, I'm sure you'll have examples to share. Cities are also making data open and accessible to its citizens, right? So this is, for example, London's data store. So any citizen can go and access data on transport and health, on communities, on jobs and economy. So I think more and more cities are also using data-based approach as a way to kind of further transparent governance. Very important, we cities, I think, again, as I mentioned, the role of data was highlighted, especially in the last 2 years, when it was extremely critical to crowdsource a lot of data on health, especially in the pandemic, that where are the hotspots, and increasingly a lot of cities use this for crime mapping, use this for safety mapping. There are a lot of apps, like one is, there is a safe city app which allows women to kind of generate data on how safe they feel in the city. So I think crowdsourcing data also has become a very important kind of a way to involve people in generating and using this data. Finally, we are also using data. Data also helps cities to tailor their interventions to the people who are the most affected, right? So you will see a lot of exercises now also in participatory planning, where we are asking people, cities are going out and asking people to identify hotspots of crime, identify hotspots of where the natural environment is degrading, where the streets are unsafe, and that also leads to a lot of participatory collaborative decision making. So just to wrap up, why are we doing this? Why did we essentially look at a context? Because as we go to cities with this idea that we have to think about ITC and their needs into our planning frameworks, and we have to use data to drive this decision making. The idea is to reinforce that, listen, data has already become a part of how cities are functioning. They are already doing some of this, so they have to view this as an extension of all the course that already the cities are on, which is essentially more and more evidence based decision making. Now, within the concept of data based approaches and using data for decision making, the second chapter, essentially, we are very strongly focusing on what we call performance measurement, right? So performance measurement means developing a framework to systematically collect data, analyze data, and use it for decision making, and do it in a cyclical process, right? So we are going to, in this chapter, we are going to understand very basic the principles of performance measurement, distinguishing between what is data versus what is indicators, what is benchmarks, look at some of the past examples of performance measurement in India, and then do some hands-on kind of discussion on how do we identify data points for indicators, etc. This module has been designed because as BVLF, and as many cities started implementing ITC friendly, neighborhoods and intervention, and you have this data list, there was still observed that there is still some lack of clarity within city officials with respect to, what is raw data versus how do you process that raw data into something which is more meaningful, like an indicator, right? Or how do you compare what you get against a benchmark? So this particular chapter is specifically to, just again bring back focus on that how do we systematically collect data, analyze and use it. So very broadly, performance measurement is essentially, what is performance measurement? It's a process of collecting, analyzing and reporting data on the effectiveness and efficiency of programs, systems and services. And I think it's important that we highlight, in this module, this idea of collecting, analyzing and reporting data with the purpose of improving efficiency of program, system and services. Right? There is a lot of other data also that cities collect. Cities collect census data. Cities collect data on, traffic volumes. On a regular basis, cities collect data on, they have access to a lot of property tax data. They have access to a lot of taxation data, price data, essentially. But once we put all that data into a framework for systemic improvement of a particular idea or a system, is when we are using it for performance measurement. Why? What is driving the use of performance measures in local government? So essentially, the first is more and more people are demanding accountability from government, right? Or if a government goes ahead and does, let's say, a flyover or a BRT system, right? People are asking, people are becoming aware, right? Where was the need, right? What drove you to take the decision? Why is our city prioritizing, flyovers over more pedestrian friendly transport, right? So one is extremely important, that as we become a more aware citizenry, we are demanding accountability, and then having a performance measurement net kind of a framework enhances that accountability. The second is, there is an increased interest among local legislators in performance related information to aid in program evaluation and resource allocation. What does that mean? Essentially, performance measurement allows you to highlight certain pain points, right? It allows you to highlight, oh, this city is doing very well in waste collection because of, we measured waste collection against indicators, so it's doing very well. But when it comes to, let's say, sewage management, there are a lot of gaps, and hence the resources should be targeted towards that area, as just as an example, right? So it is really helping. It helps cities to divert resources towards particular decisions. And then finally, performance measurement also helps cities to become more results oriented. What does that mean? So a lot of times cities measure things like, we spent, so many crores on this project, right? So we are often used to identifying input indicators that, oh, so the success is spending so many millions on housing, or so many millions on a waste treatment plant, or a new park, or improving streets. But finally, if we have a performance measurement framework, it allows us to position that success in terms of whether there is an actual result, right? So instead of saying the spending was so much, it becomes more about that earlier the city only had X amount of green space per person. It has increased with systemic improvements and interventions. It has increased to so much, or it has increased 2 times, right? So it also allows cities to be more results oriented. So essentially, what is the purpose of evaluation metrics, and how do we start seeing this performance measurement? So a performance of any entity or a system is measured through evaluation metrics, and we know at a very basic fundamental level. For instance, you have the grading system in schools, right? So you have subjects and you have grades, and then those grades mean something. That for example, the benchmark of A grade means that you have achieved a certain level of understanding and knowledge, and then it goes down A, B, C, D, right? So you will have some evaluation metrics which will allow cities to compare the performance of a particular city or a particular neighborhood with other neighborhoods or other kind of similar similar units, right? So essentially we measure progress in a cyclical process. If there are red flags, we are able to identify those, or this indicator is not doing very well. So that's the second point, that we are able to provide an early warning to prevent any setbacks that the projects may have. And then finally, data performance measurement is an excellent way to communicate ideas to citizens, right? Instead of saying, the city has improved, or the city is now a green city, if there is a data which is backing that statement, then it is much more powerful, right? So you can say, we as a city have increased child friendly spaces from this per square meter per person to twice of that, right? And it also allows you to share information powerfully. So what are the key principles of a performance kind of a framework? So all of us know this, and I'm sure this module is a module to reiterate some of these concepts, and also a way to kind of take these with city agencies. So first and foremost, we have what we call the performance indicator, right? We also call it sometimes key performance indicator. So that essentially is a quantitative or qualitative measurement by which the performance, efficiency, achievement can be assessed, often by comparison with an agreed standard or target. So if I give you an example of a performance indicator, let's say in the water supply sector, water supply and sanitation, some of you will be aware that there is this set benchmark for LPCD, right? Liters per capita per day, that a city should have should supply so much liters per capita per day. So that becomes an indicator. Now you can compare whether Kochi, how does Kochi fare in LPCD versus Nagpur in Maharashtra. How does Nagpur fare in relationship to Ahmedabad? So that becomes a common kind of a measurement for which you can assess performance and also compare. Once we understand that, the next concept is the service level benchmark. So if we take this concept forward, that you have liters per capita per day, let's say, then you have a benchmark, a standard, which is said that if cities are providing this much, then it's good, right? I think some of you will know what that standard is. I think it's 115 or something. I don't remember, but essentially there's a standard set, right? That this is good. So much LPCD is the standard that cities have to aim to achieve, right? So that becomes the service level benchmark. So an indicator, and then the next evaluation metric is the service level benchmark. And then finally, all performance measurement frameworks are we can only do so much until we don't have ways to visualize the information we get, represent the information we get, and analyze data in a way that helps us make decisions. So the third concept is often a dashboard, right? A dashboard means you can drag and drop different indicators and visualize, right? How does, like, to take that example forward, how does Nagpur fare in relationship to Kochi in provision of water or managing waste, etc., right? So that dashboard is a tool which allows you to visualize, represent, and manage data. Just a few examples. I think again, this will be helpful for cities to put this in context. Swachhata Survekshan, led by the for under Swachh Bharat mission, had a set of indicators against and a set of benchmarks set against which cities had to fill information and see kind of compare their performance, right? So what is the household level toilet coverage? What is how much waste is being recycled? How much waste is being put in landfills, etc. So all of those become examples of a performance measurement framework. Just to take that example forward, the indicator, for example, is percentage of total dry waste collected, treated, or recycled, either by decentralized, centralized process, right? That's the indicator. And then you have benchmarks, that if cities are doing more than 95% of the waste, so if they are recycling, treating, etc., then it indicates excellent performance. If cities are not even doing 40%, then it's poor performance, right? So that this is, this same concept is essentially what cities, have to understand, even when we talk about the ITCN framework, when we come to it. I will just skip this. Now, once we identify indicators and service level benchmarks, it's also important that city officials understand that to get this information about indicators, essentially we need is data points, right? So for a particular indicator, let's say the indicator is percentage of waste that is being recycled, right? To do that, they need multiple data points. So one data point is they will need all the amount of total waste that is being generated in the city. That's one data point. Then they will need a data point, then they'll have to go to all these different decentralized methods of, some waste might be going in a recycling plant, some waste might be going in a mass biofuel plant. So they will have to collect data from various points to say, okay, how much of the waste is getting treated in the biomass plant, how much is getting recycled. Those becomes the data points, right? We can't go ahead and start getting indicator data. Cities will have to kind of decode that indicator into something which is, as basic as a data point or a raw data point, collect, all that data, and then identify or arrive at the indicator value. So for example, one indicator is number of good quality housing area, good quality park spaces in a neighborhood, right? Let's say. So you'll have to identify and decode what are the different types of data that we need for this and open up for a discussion. We have just some 9 things here. Can we quickly, classify this either as a service level benchmark? So which of these is a not service level? Which of these is a benchmark? Which of this is an indicator? And which of this is a raw data? So per capita supply of water should be 135 LPCD. What is that?
Service level benchmark.
So it's a benchmark, right? Because it's a standard, that 135 LPCD is a standard. Okay. Number of children in a neighborhood between 0 to 5 years. What could that be?
This is raw data.
This is raw data because it's not an indicator. It doesn't indicate, unless it's just raw data. It will help us to make decisions or arrive at an indicator. Efficiency in redressal of citizen complaints.
It's indicator.
It's an indicator. Correct. So it's an indicator. Some cities will be good. Some cities will say we redress complaint in like 2 days. Some will, take longer. So that's an indicator. WHO recommends availability of 9 square meter of green space per individual. What is that?
Benchmark.
Benchmark. Number of waste collections vehicles in the city.
Raw data.
Raw data.
Raw data, right? Unless we have some population data, household data to process it with, it doesn't mean anything on its own. New healthcare policy mandates a minimum of 2 beds per 1,000 population.
Benchmark.
Benchmark.
Benchmark. 2,200 Anganwadis in the city.
Raw data.
Raw data, right? We'll have to process it to arrive at some indicator. Percentage of streets with adequate lighting.
So also raw data.
It is indicator.
It is an indicator. The raw data in this will be the streets data, then all the lighting data, then wo lighting mein kitna lux ka lighting hai, all that will be raw data, and we will arrive at this is an indicator. Existing condition of a utility. So if we are mapping that, how well this park is running, what will that be?
Raw data.
Raw data. So I think, all of us know this very well, but I think as we speak to city officials, there is a lot of confusion about, what is an indicator, how do we collect raw data. So it's just a good exercise, and you can use examples from your projects, from your cities to, generally just come to, a very simple, clear understanding of what it is. And then finally, we end this process before this chapter, before we get into the specifics of ITCN, to essentially say that this performance measurement framework is not something that is one time. Okay, it will be helpful if we are able to develop this system, and year after year, or after a regular interval, we keep collecting data, right, to measure indicators. We keep comparing that with benchmarks. So agar aaj Ahmedabad mein per square green space per square meter इतना है, तो 3 साल बाद जब शायद बहुत इम्प्रूवमेंट हुआ तो कितना हुआ, और वो बेंचमार्क के अगेंस्ट हमको कॉन्स्टेंटली उसको इवैल्यूएट करना पड़ेगा. उसके बाद उसी से हमको एरियाज ऑफ इम्प्रूवमेंट समझेंगे, राइट. जब हम अभी बात करेंगे, इतने सारे इंडिकेटर्स, कुछ अच्छा कर रही होगी सिटी, कहीं पे किसी इंडिकेटर्स में लैग कर रही होगी, तो कौन से जगह पे सिटी को रिसोर्सेज स्पेंड करने हैं, कौन से जगह पे उनको ट्रेनिंग देने की जरूरत है, कौन से जगह पे ज्यादा पुश देने की जरूरत है, will all be identified based on what your indicators tell you, correct. Based on that you manage priorities and informed decisions. हम सब जानते हैं, और आप सबको भी यही प्रश्न उठेगा कि इतनी सारी चीजें करनी है सिटीज को, पानी भी देना है, गटर भी देना है, हेल्थ केयर भी प्रोवाइड करना है, पार्क्स भी बनाने हैं, छोटे बच्चों के लिए प्लेफुल स्पेसेस भी बनानी है, स्ट्रीट सेफ होने चाहिए. सिटीज कैसे प्रायोरिटाइज करें? तो अगर हम सारे ही सिस्टम्स में, यदि हमारे पास एक परफॉर्मेंस मेजरमेंट फ्रेमवर्क होगा जिसमें हमको after every few years or of doing this cycle, we are able to identify areas which require momentum, which require push. That's how we are able to decide priorities. That's how cities will be able to decide priorities, and then finally take action and implement intervention. And then again that same process starts, because they will have to measure and go back. Okay, we spent so much time on improving streets, right? Did it really help in the safety? Or do we really see a lot more women and young children on streets now because we improved the city? So you again do the cyclical process of performance measurement, which involves data collection, analysis, and then reporting and management. This is very important to understand. A lot of times cities think कि हाँ हम ये data collect करके ले आएंगे, right? As if it's a one-time activity for a particular intervention. The whole idea behind this module, and especially once we get into data for ITCN, is to instill this way of working, right? That this is a constant process, that we have to constantly work with data. It is something which is extremely crucial to cities working. Now that we have understood broad, reiterated, I'm sure all of us were familiar with it, we will get down to understanding. So what is this performance measurement framework for ITC neighborhoods, right? So how do we start kind of rating what is happening in the cities? How do we start comparing neighborhoods? Which city, kahan pe intervention karna hai? Which indicators will tell us what, right? So first we will come to essentially, why do we need data for ITC friendly cities? A lot of you, I think, in the last 3 modules have, raised this concern that it's a very new concept, right? It's a concept which is deeply rooted in behavior. It is rooted in understanding behavior. It is rooted in kind of shaping opinions, changing behaviors and opinions. So it is extremely important that we are able to drive this agenda ahead only with data, right? If we go and speak to cities that we need to, improve, we need to make our cities ITC friendly, we will need a lot of background information and understanding of the needs of children. What do they need? How is one park better than the other? So we'll need extremely granular data to really make true interventions which impact people's life, right? So it will essentially is very critical, and it's a very new concept. So all the more critical that we understand some of these indicators very well. Not all parks are the same, right? Currently cities, all of our cities are used to just leaving it at the idea, oh, there is a park, right? But is that park really, a park where small children and their caregivers can feel safe and can feel engaged, right? Okay, the street has a footpath, but is it really a footpath which is inclusive for people of all, abilities, gender, age, sizes? So this is important that if we have to drive this understanding in cities, we will have to go equipped with, what should cities pay attention to, right? And what are the granular details that cities should pay attention to? Again, I think most cities know this. If you had to make an improvement in water and sanitation, you had to measure. You had to measure the service level benchmarks for water and sanitation and then systematically make improvements. Similarly, if we have to make our neighborhoods ITC friendly, we will have to continuously measure existing conditions and monitor these long-term performances, right? And continue that kind of that spirit of evidence-based decision making that more and more cities are currently kind of employing. We will also have to do this because we want to promote data sharing and exchange, right? We want the data of parks departments to be shared with streets, to be shared with health, right? So so all the departments are able to jointly come together and make decisions which are which the city needs. It is also important that how do we communicate to citizens, right? So if cities do some ITC friendly interventions, how do they communicate to people that what is the value of that intervention? How did the value change, or how did that intervention change or impact young children and their caregivers? So you'll also need data to communicate these ideas to different agencies, but also with citizens. So what is this performance measurement framework for ITC? So first, there are two parts to it. So one is the objectives of ITC. All of us have had a long, in the last 3 modules, we have very well understood that there are 5 objectives of ITC, right? ITCN. So first is that your neighborhoods have to be inclusive, your neighborhoods have to be accessible, your neighborhoods have to be safe and secure, they have to be green, and they have to be playful, right? These are the broad objectives guiding ITCN. Now जो हमारे service level benchmarks हैं to measure how how inclusive, how accessible, how safe is essentially borrowed from these objectives. So that is one idea. And then the benchmarks, the way ITC and ITC defines it, and this whole project is defined, is very impactful, right? So we are not giving some numbers or saying this is good. They are essentially they have the benchmarks, 3 benchmarks. So the benchmarks are essentially surviving, striving, and thriving. What do they mean? Surviving means कि हाँ हो रहा है, right? छोटे बच्चे हैं और उनके केयर गिवर्स हैं, जैसे तैसे किसी माहौल में वो सर्वाइव कर रहे हैं. There is not a lot of focus on their needs, right? That is the basic, which is surviving. Striving, so if we understand striving, that means I'm striving to get better, right? So there might be so if you fall in the striving category, it essentially means that okay, the city is trying, right? So the city is trying to get better and trying to incorporate the needs of ITC into all their programs, into their policies. And then thriving means that this is a city in which our young children and caregivers are really thriving. This is a city which is paying attention to their needs, incorporating their needs in the policy framing. So there are these 3 levels of benchmark which relate to the objectives of ITCN, which is inclusive, accessible, safety, green and playful. अब ये इंडिकेटर्स क्या मेजर करते हैं? तो हमारे पास, आपने ये भी पूर्वी के प्रेजेंटेशन में देखा होगा, हमारे पास 5 जगह है या 5 एलिमेंट्स है जहां पे हमको चेंजेस लाने हैं. पहला एलिमेंट इज नेबरहुड. तो नेबरहुड में कैसे चेंजेस लाने हैं? नेबरहुड में पार्क्स, प्लेग्राउंड्स होने चाहिए जो इक्वी डिस्टेंट हो, जो सबके लिए एक्सेसिबल हो, आंगनवाड़ी होनी चाहिए, क्रेश होना चाहिए. So there are certain things that we want to improve in the neighborhood element, right? वहां पे चेंज आएगा. दूसरा, what is the element is parks and open spaces. ठीक है, पार्क है, पर क्या वो पार्क ITC फ्रेंडली है? क्या वो ऐसा पार्क है जो प्लेफुल है, which encourages curiosity, which is safe, which is inclusive? So that is the second element, which is park. Third is urban services. Services will include essentially your waste management, clean drinking water, etc. Fourth, very important, especially for this framework for ITC, is essentially social infrastructure, right? That क्या हमारे neighborhoods में care givers के लिए और छोटे बच्चों के लिए जो social infrastructure होना चाहिए वो है? क्या हमारे neighborhoods में dispensaries हैं? क्या हमारे neighborhoods में आंगनवाड़ीज है? creches hain. So that is all the social infrastructure. And then finally, very important, because streets are the kind of the lifelines which connect all these. क्या हमारी streets छोटे बच्चों के लिए और उनके caregivers के लिए safe है? Can we do better? Where are we, right? So we have the objectives, we have the benchmarks, and we'll come to what are the benchmarks are essentially categorized as surviving, striving, thriving, and all these indicators are essentially along these 5 elements of neighborhood, streets, parks, social infrastructure, and urban services. So just to give a few examples, now all these indicators, and we will take some time to go over all the indicators that are mentioned in the the ITCN framework and policy book. But just to take a few examples, safety अगर एक objective है तो उसका एक इंडिकेटर जैसे बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट इंडिकेटर है परसेंटेज ऑफ क्लियर एंड अनऑब्स्ट्रक्टेड पेडेस्ट्रियन फुटपाथ्स ऑफ टोटल रोड लेंथ. तो यदि आपके नेबरहुड में इतने किलोमीटर के स्ट्रीट्स हैं तो कितने में अनऑब्स्ट्रक्टेड क्लियर फुटपाथ्स हैं, वो एक इंडिकेटर हो गया. तो यदि हम ग्रीन देखें तो उसका एक एग्जांपल है हाउसहोल्ड लेवल कवरेज ऑफ सॉलिड वेस्ट सर्विसेज थ्रू डोर टू डोर कलेक्शन, राइट. कितने घरों में घर से ही वेस्ट pickup hota hai and goes forward. So that's an indicator, for example, mentioned in the ITCN evaluation, one indicator which relates to the green aspect of a neighborhood, right? Then when we look at accessible, one indicator is percentage of buildings within 300 meters distance of a green space. कि ठीक है आपके नेबरहुड में एक पार्क तो है, पर क्या वो पार्क वेल लोकेटेड है या एक कोने में है? तो वो पार्क के 300 मीटर में कितने सारे घर या कितने सारे बिल्डिंग्स एक्सेसिबल हैं. फिर है कि inclusive, so that relates to the streets, that how many streets have footpaths, walk zones. Playful का इंडिकेटर है that कितने सारे पार्क्स में actually infants, toddlers और caregivers वो पार्क को यूज कर रहे हैं. बहुत सारे हमारे शहरों में पार्क्स होते हैं जो बहुत छोटे बच्चे और उनके केयर गिवर्स बहुत यूज नहीं करते, बिकॉज द वे द पार्क इज डिजाइंड, द एक्टिविटीज इन द पार्क एक्सेट्रा नॉट conducive to that group, right? So that's one indicator for playful. So this is how the indicators are organized. So if we take one indicator for let's say neighborhood level, that percentage of buildings within 300 meter distance of a green space above 125 square meter. So you have to identify a green space of 125 square meter and how many buildings are within 300 meter. So agar sare hi buildings are within 300 meter distance of a green space, then it's thriving. या उस नेबरहुड के सिर्फ 50% बिल्डिंग्स को ही वो पार्क एक्सेसिबल है, then it is thriving. और अगर उतना भी नहीं है, which is then it's surviving, right? There is a park, but less than 50% buildings are within 300 meters of the park. Similarly, this is the second is an example of a street indicator, which is essentially about a footpath or a walk zone. I will just quickly run you through, so you will get access in this essentially guidebook, which is called which has all the details. I think it has some 65 indicators based on the 5 elements and based on the objectives. For each indicator you will see if I just click on it, so this is the essentially the reference book for understanding that what is the performance measurement framework for ITCN. So I'll just quickly scroll down to the indicators. So let's see, this is an indicator. So you see in यहाँ पे आपको neighborhood यानी यहाँ पे आपका element लिखा हुआ है, यहाँ पे आपका indicator title है, and then फिर benchmark values हैं, thriving, striving, surviving. तो हर इंडिकेटर के लिए वो thriving का वैल्यू, striving का वैल्यू और surviving का वैल्यू आपको मिल जाएगा. Right, so you will have a lot very interesting indicators, very important indicators that we should be paying attention to. That we are not yet thinking about are all part of this metrics. The indicators are also divided into core indicators and support indicators. So आपको जहाँ पे core दिखेगा यानी अगर हमको सच में इम्प्रूव करना है तो कोर इंडिकेटर्स पे तो सबसे पहले ध्यान देना चाहिए. उसके बाद based on our capabilities, abilities, resources, we can also do, and it's also important to do, collect information on some of the supporting indicators. But essentially, you will have definitely the cities have to pay attention to the core indicators. So this guidebook has been shared with you. So when you go back to your cities and do these trainings with your cities, you can also tailor, like I showed some examples, you can also tailor these examples based on maybe what the cities will resonate most with, या आपके शहरों में जो किस चीज पे काम नहीं हुआ है या हुआ है, उसके बेसिस पे भी आप इसमें से इंडिकेटर सिलेक्ट करके you can lead this discussion forward. Finally, the fourth theme is, okay, we have indicators, we have benchmarks, but how do we start really collecting this data, right? Cities might feel a little bit overwhelmed that itna sara data kaise collect kare, kaun collect karega, what is the system of collecting this data? So we'll kind of have a brief section on how can cities kind of decode this, unpack this, and start implementing and collecting this data. तो सबसे पहले तो हमने देखा कि हमारा जो इवैल्यूएशन मैट्रिक्स है वो 5 एलिमेंट्स के हिसाब से है. क्या है वो 5 एलिमेंट्स? The 5 elements of ITC on which we have to collect data.
Playfulness, safety.
Those are objectives, right? Those are objectives. But what are the 5 elements? हम किन areas में data collect कर रहे हैं?
Oh.
Does someone remember that? We can go back, no worries.
Footpath.
See, these are the 5 areas, right?
No.
So we are collecting data on neighborhoods, we are collecting data on parks, urban services, social infrastructure, and streets, right? These are the 5 areas because it is ITCN. So we are not going and collecting data, let's say, on bus services or transport or lots of other things which are important, but we are focused on these 5 things as part of this framework, correct? Now, to collect this data, we can tell cities that essentially they can organize their data collection at 3 levels. So what are the 3 levels? The first is the city level. यदि आप वो evaluation metrics देखेंगे तो उसमें कुछ डेटा ऐसा भी है जो सिटी लेवल पे कलेक्ट करना है, जैसे नंबर ऑफ चिल्ड्रन. यदि हम 2022 में वो डेटा कर रहे हैं तो मेरे शहर में बर्थ रेट्स क्या है, मेरे शहर में कितने 5 साल के छोटे बच्चे हैं, ब्रॉडली ट्रांसपोर्ट नेटवर्क्स क्या है, एयर पोल्यूशन की क्वालिटी क्या है. हमको ये क्यों करना चाहिए डेटा कलेक्ट सिटी लेवल पे? We are essentially talking about ITC friendly neighborhoods, right? But there is also some of these very critical data that we will need, cities will need to pay attention at the city level. Why? How does this data help us to create ITC friendly neighborhoods? Why is it important for the cities to know, let's say, number of children?
That would result into the kind of gravity and the importance to be given and kind of spaces to be designed or provided along with the streets. So this is the basic data that eventually a city level data would help us to understand it.
Absolutely. It's about positioning. And see, again, there might be cities which are younger, right? Where the demographic shift at a world level, we know that, Europe and a lot of other areas, there is more aging population. So if a city has more younger population, if there are projections that the city is going to get younger, then it gives them cities some tools and data to make a case to their political representatives, invest in ITC because we are a city which is very young, we are projected to get more young children, etc. So some of this city level data is very important to position, this entire kind of drive this impetus for the ITCN. Similarly, air pollution, etc. Air pollution affects young children a lot more. So if cities are particularly, grappling with air pollution, it's important to frame this idea of ITCN within that concept, right? So cities definitely will need some data at the city level, correct? Then you need some data at the neighborhood level. जैसे आपके neighborhood में कितने parks है, उन parks का distribution कैसा है, उन parks आपके वो neighborhood में waste collection की services कैसे है, tot lots कैसे है, health centers कैसे है. So you will also need some data at the neighborhood level, right? So cities will have to organize the collection and management at the neighborhood level. And then finally, because we have we also have parks and play spaces as an element, and we also have social services as an element, right? In which we go deeper into things like how much footfall does that park see, or is that park being used by ITC? Then that means we have to go deeper into that one bound space, whether it's an Anganwadi or a park, to get even more granular data about at that level, right? So for example, presence of play equipment in parks, that is a data that you'll have to go for at each park and collect, right? Is there natural material, which is again very important for ITC and their growth in the early years? Is there mud? Is there texture? So we will have to go and assess at a park level, lighting in parks, running water, toilets in Anganwadis. So all this data can be collected at a point of reference, right? Which is the center, the place where ITC kind of the anchor institution or the Anganwadi or the park, right? So cities, once they look at these 65 indicators, they can organize, okay, ये वाले indicators के लिए हमको neighborhood level पे organize होना है. कुछ indicators है जिसमें हमको parks या आंगनवाड़ीज identify करके या streets identify करके detailed information at a amenity level lena hai. What will be the, for examples, based on these 65 indicators, what is the example of this, right? So city level pay, you have things like birth registrations, you have budgets allocated for parks. Again, it's a very important data piece in terms of positioning this thing. Neighborhood level पे आप collect कर सकते हैं कितना area है under parks and open spaces. Air quality index neighborhood level पे क्या है, street connectivity कैसी है, to different एक street पे lighting enough है क्या, parks में availability of toilets है क्या, drinking water है क्या, right? So this is a lot of, for cities to understand these 65, they have to just understand this, that certain data they will have to kind of get at city level, certain data they will have to organize to collect at the neighborhood level. And if you're making very specific interventions, at the level of a amenity park, then you have to go deeper and get some more data. Now we are clear about city and we are clear about, how do we, a park is there so we can go and measure. Now neighborhoods is slightly fuzzy, right? Because I think Purvi also said in our kind of Indian context, we don't have a one accepted definition of what is a neighborhood. तो यदि हम cities को बोलें कि आपको neighborhood delineate करना है ये data collect करने के लिए, so they will be like, what is a neighborhood? How do we delineate neighborhood? So ITC, under this framework, there are two ways that we have identified that we can help cities identify these neighborhoods for which they can collect data. The first is that you place an anchor institution at the center. So what is an anchor institution? Anchor institution जिसको ITC बहुत use करते हैं. It could be an Anganwadi, it could be a public school, or any other institution which is frequented by infant, toddlers and caregivers. एक आप locate कर लीजिए और उसके 300 मीटर और 500 मीटर में जो area आएगा, we can demarcate that as a neighborhood. Okay, so we identify one Anganwadi and then you identify 300 meter. Why 300 meter, 500 meter? I think we covered this in the module 1.
Walking distance.
Yeah, walking distance for ITC, right? छोटे बच्चे और उनके caregivers इतने ही distance में comfortably walking कर सकते हैं. So वो एक हमारा neighborhood हो गया. उस neighborhood में now then we can go and systematically collect data based on all these indicators. That's one way, you know, of identifying neighborhoods and start this process of kind of collecting data and arriving at indicators. The
Another
other
could
way,
be the ward level delineation itself, because all the Anganwadis and schools are allocated ward wise.
we will come to it. Correct. I think that's a fair point. The other thing is, unfortunately, ward is too big, right? In our cities, sometimes the wards are, you know, 1 square kilometer or more, 3 square kilometer. Wards are based on population. Typically, जैसे अहमदाबाद में एक ward का population 1 लाख है, right? और वो 1 लाख population अगर बहुत dense है तो वो बहुत
Yes.
छोटा है, और अगर बहुत sparse density है वो तो वो ward बड़ा है. But that is not an area which is walkable. It is not an area that can be, you know, systematically planned and intervened with. So what the other way is, you start with a ward. Okay, so we tell cities, fine, let's identify a ward. That could be a good way to start. But within that ward, can we identify neighborhoods? And then how do we identify neighborhoods? Essentially areas with a population of 12 to 15,000 people. Okay. The second criteria will be, आप सभी के शहरों में there will be some commonly understood areas of societies. जैसे मैं अहमदाबाद में हूँ तो नवरंगपुरा में नवरंगपुरा is a ward, right? लेकिन स्वाति सोसाइटी करके एक सोसाइटी है which is identified as a neighborhood, right? People have shared amenities in that area. They have a public common in that area, etc. So the third idea will be start with a ward and then start identifying neighborhoods with a population of 12 to 15,000 people based on these boundaries which are commonly understood by people, right? So that cities will have to do based on their understanding of the city. So that's one idea. So just to illustrate, this is Ahmedabad, right? So ये शाही बाग एक ward है अहमदाबाद में, East Ahmedabad में है. This is Sabarmati River. So that ward boundary is an identified ward boundary, right? But then we can go deeper and then we can understand that Shahi Bagh mein, let's say Jain Colony is a neighborhood which is identified as a very distinct you know, area. वहाँ पे शायद लोग एक दूसरे को देखते हैं. नॉन स्ट्रेंजर्स की बात की थी पूर्वी ने फर्स्ट मॉड्यूल में. That's the concept, you know, that area generally people know कि वहाँ पे वो काका आते हैं रोज वॉकिंग के लिए, वो फैमिली में you know वो अपने नानी रोज वो बच्चे को लेके पार्क में आती है. So an area which is about 12 to 15,000 population, you know, which is identified by people, which they have some fuzzy boundary, we can identify that as a neighborhood and start this exercise at that level. Right? So that's other way कि यदि हमको एंकर इंस्टीट्यूशन सेंटर में रख के आइडेंटिफाई नहीं करना, शायद ऐसा भी हो सकता है कि सिटीजन्स की तरफ से डिमांड आए कि हमको अपना नेबरहुड आईटीसी फ्रेंडली करना है. इन दैट केस they will probably not you know they will not probably situate the anchor institute at the center. They will situate their understanding of their neighborhood as the neighborhood, right? So we can apply both these lenses to start delineating neighborhoods as to what do we classify a neighborhood. As long as it's 12 to 15,000 population, there is some shared amenities, common understanding of an area where people relate to, the idea of known strangers, that what is that area in which, you know, people are generally have seen each other, are familiar with it. Cities will have to do this in participation with RWAs, correct? Cities will not know, you know, ye Jain colony could be a neighborhood. So, but if they lead this exercise in participation with RWAs and citizen groups, we can absolutely start delineating neighborhoods within wards. And why not wards? Because wards become too kind of a big an area and not very conducive to the kind of interventions that we are planning as part of this ITCN, right? So that's, you know, one idea. So based on this concept, यदि आपके पास एक cluster of apartments है 12 से 15,000 population, that becomes a neighborhood, right? So you can also do these assessments at that level कि वो neighborhood में जो park है apartment में, you know, is it really playful? Is it really designed to meet the needs of ITC, etc.? Then it can also be layouts. बहुत शहरों में लेआउट्स आर वेरी पॉपुलर, राइट? पुणे में शायद लेआउट्स है, बैंगलोर हैज अ लॉट ऑफ लेआउट्स डन बाय बैंगलोर डेवलपमेंट अथॉरिटी. सो अ पर्टिकुलर लेआउट, you know, block, I think in Noida or Ghaziabad or Gandhinagar, there's also the concepts of blocks. So we can also look at blocks, you know, if we can identify those as neighborhoods. It's very important to pay attention to, you know, lower income residential neighborhoods also, right? Because those are the neighborhoods which are sometimes very dense, which sometimes also lack most of these amenities. Like a private residential complex might have, you know, a park. You might have to use the ITC lens to improve the design of the park, but they will have the space in the park. But it's in these areas, it's like the old city areas, the lower income areas, you know, unauthorized colonies, slum settlements. These are neighborhoods that cities can prioritize to also, you know, start improving and improving them from the ITC lens. So they can be slums. Public housing clusters could be also taken up, you know, as a neighborhood, and kind of evaluated based on these principles and indicators and improved, right? So that was how do we delineate neighborhoods. How do we get this data, right? So हमने indicators देख लिए, हमको generally understanding है कि कुछ data हमको city के level पे लेना है, कुछ data हमको neighborhood के level पे collect करना है, और कुछ data हमको एक zoomed in focus anchor institution के level पे collect करना है, whether it's a park, whether it's a, you know, Anganwadi, things like that. How do we get this data? Where do we get this data from, and how do we collect this data, right? So we all know that, you know, for, you know, there are two kinds of data. So one is called secondary data collection. इसका मतलब है existing sources से यदि हमें data मिलता है तो हम वो collate और curate कर सकते हैं, right? So अगर past में कोई survey हुआ है आपके शहर में, which has marked all the parks and play lots and tot lots, we can use it. We can use that secondary data as a starting point, right? So all that is called secondary data, that we actually use some of the collated data that the cities have. But for a lot of these indicators, cities will have to actually engage in primary data collection, right? So cities will have to mobilize resources, people, money, time, you know, engage people to systematically collect this primary data, which is first hand, right? How do we do that? अब उसमें भी we understand that primary data में भी some data is what we call quantitative data, right? Which is capita water consumption is a numerical data. 9 square meter per person, yeah, you know, that's an indicator, but the size of a park is numerical data. Number of people attending, going to a park is numerical data. So all that is quantitative data. Then we also have qualitative data, which provides us extremely useful insights on how are people really using a particular amenity, right? So if there is a tot lot, छोटा सा, तो क्वालिटेटिव डेटा यदि हम एक शैडोइंग करके मेथड है, शैडोइंग यानी हम किसी एक, यू नो, अगर एक केयर गिवर के साथ एक छोटा बच्चा आया है और वो आधा घंटा उस पार्क में बिताते हैं, तो हम चुपचाप उनको ऑब्जर्व करें और शैडो करें कि वो कहाँ टाइम स्पेंड कर रहे हैं, राइट? क्या वो सैंड पिट में ज्यादा देर है वो बच्चा, या फिर घास में ज्यादा खेल रहा है, या फिर मड में ज्यादा खेल रहा है, या फिर वो 20 मिनट में ही निकल जाते हैं या 1.5 घंटा स्पेंड करते हैं. ऑल दिस डेटा इज एक्सट्रीमली यूजफुल टू कलेक्ट, to kind of, you know, guide decisions on how we can, you know, make these all our neighborhoods, parks more ITC friendly. Qualitative data can also be data on perceptions, right? Or perceptions about safety. You know, क्या आपको safe लगता है इस जगह पर, right? So all that is qualitative data, and we gather, you know, and it's about habits, it's about behavior. क्या आप अपने, you know, so asking caregivers कि क्या आप अपने छोटे बच्चे को, you know, लेकर सुबह और शाम कौन से एरिया में जाते हैं, क्यों जाते हैं, right? All those things about priorities, habits, beliefs will all be captured through qualitative data, which will give useful insights on kind of, you know, how to start thinking about this. Examples where can cities start getting some of the data required for ITC indicators? नेशनल सेंसस ऑफ इंडिया का, नेशनल फैमिली हेल्थ सर्वे का पीरियोडिकली सर्वेज होते हैं, maternity rates मिलते हैं, birth rates मिलते हैं. So some of this very broad data on whether my city is a city with a lot of young children population, is it going to get younger, what are the projections, etc., can be collated from some of these reports which are periodic. Now so that is secondary data. Some other types of secondary data at a more granular level is, this is an example of Ahmedabad. अहमदाबाद ने रिसेंटली एक पोर्टल बनाया है जिसमें शहर के सारे पार्क्स आइडेंटिफाइड है. सो राइट, इट्स अ GIS डेटाबेस. सो हर पार्क का मुझे बेसिक डेटा अवेलेबल है. सो अगर मैं क्लिक करूँ उस पार्क पे, यहाँ पे आपको दिख रहा होगा ग्रीन पार्क, तो मुझे जनरली मिल जाता है उस पार्क में वो कितना बड़ा पार्क है, प्लॉट एरिया कितना है, गेट है कि नहीं, बेसिक डेटा, मेंटेनेंस है कि नहीं, उस पार्क में टॉयलेट है कि नहीं. So cities can also leverage, or I think this was made under smart cities, right? And there's a strong synergy between the smart city program and what we are trying to do under ITCN. So some of these cities can go back to their smart city databases and see what all data is already collated and is being kind of digitized or accessible in some formats like this, right? दिल्ली ने शायद सारे आंगनवाड़ीज मैप किए हैं, सारे पब्लिक हेल्थ मैप किए हैं. सो काफी सारा some of this data we can also find with the city databases, right? Then we have essentially secondary data मिल जाएगा, पर यदि नहीं है, because some of our indicators are very granular, right? They are getting very specifics based on ITC's behavior. So how do we get? We will have to engage in primary data collection. So हमको cities will have to dedicate resources towards this very systematic exercise of primary data collection. So the primary data will be either qualitative data or quantitative data, correct? Both qualitative and quantitative data can be collected either through interviews. I think we all know interview formats. Some of them can be structured interviews, semi-structured interviews. We can also use surveys. So surveys are essentially, multiple choice, short answer surveys that we can float out to population. Use observation, like I gave an example. So observe, how is a park being used? Observe and map those, peculiarities of behavior and where people are doing what. So that's observation. Then we also have discussions and focus group discussions. So we would have kind of, all of you are also aware of that. That's a way to also get a group to collectively speak about, discuss some of the challenges, some of the perceptions. So we can also use focus group discussions. And one important kind of a method, and which is particularly important for this agenda, which is ITC friendly neighborhoods, is what we call participatory action research. यानी शायद हम अपने neighborhood के छोटे बच्चे और उनको caregivers को involve करके ही we conduct some research in which they are not just participants, they are also data gatherers, and then they are also involved in some of these decision making about how do we improve neighborhoods, right? So participatory action research is a particularly important concept for our focus area of ITC. How examples of data, right? Now we'll go back to our concept that there are indicators and then there's data, right? So for example, the indicator is there a presence of walk zone or footpath sidewalk at major routes in neighborhood? That's an indicator. तो उसके लिए हमको डेटा क्या चाहिए? हमको कुछ टीम्स मोबिलाइज करने पड़ेंगे, जिसमें हम जैसे राइट साइड में आपको दिख रहा होगा, दिस इज फ्रॉम अहमदाबाद ओनली, हर रास्ते पे हमको जाके मार्क करना पड़ेगा. पहले तो अपने नेबरहुड के सारे रास्ते मार्क करने पड़ेंगे, राइट? दैट्स वन डेटा पॉइंट. फिर हर रास्ते पे फुटपाथ है कि नहीं, कौन से साइड पे है, दोनों साइड पे है कि नहीं, गुड कंडीशन है कि नहीं. So that will be the second data point that we will have to kind of start marking, right? Then based on this driving thriving and surviving indicators. So if surviving, striving probably will say, 50% footpaths or walk zones means that, they are trying. So then we will have to calculate percentage कि मेरे, neighborhood में 100 किलोमीटर रास्ते हैं, उसमें से 50 किलोमीटर पे footpath है. So this is what it means, right? So we will have to, by each indicator, city governments will have to decode that indicator and go and collect that data to be able to find information for that indicator. Similarly, the other indicator is average duration of visits for infants, toddlers and their caregivers at a park facilities. ये कैसे मिलेगा हमको data? Second वाला. Average duration of visits for infants, toddlers and caregivers at parks.
Shadow.
Observation या shadow, right? अगर मैंने एक पार्क आइडेंटिफाई किया तो मुझे जाके देखना ही पड़ेगा कि अभी एक caregiver or caregiver came with a 3-year-old child. Then I will have to mark and observe how much time is that caregiver and that child spending in that park, right? So this will be a more observation based survey that we will have to conduct, and we can also mark, this is an example, cities can also start marking on their parks kahan pe zyada time spend kar rahe hain, kyun. So it will all give us very helpful insights about how do we start planning these amenities. I think in this we will also have this resource shared with you. There is a very beautifully illustrated case study done and with one of the BVLF grant support, which is about kind of story strings, right? So what are story strings? And seeing what route she takes from Anganwadi to home, where does she stop, for how long does she stop, information about, oh, wahan pe shayad street is very dark, right? So that lady took, a particular street because of the perception of safety, right? Or lot of other factors. Maybe, some of the caregivers are, or the children you're taking with you are very small. So you're probably taking shorter routes, right? So what are those behavioral ideas that are guiding these decisions that children and their caregivers are taking? So that will be kind of identified through these methods of observation and shadowing. Okay. Now let's decode what all do we need. So for example, number of good quality park spaces in the neighborhood is a indicator. So what do we need? We need to delineate a neighborhood. Yes, we need to estimate the population. We need to map all the green spaces and open spaces in that identified neighborhood. We have to then we have to probably will go and check if there are inventories and databases, of either the garden department or the smart city, which carries for some other information. We'll have to go do some site visits, some observation based visits for some of these indicators, etc. Right? Who will do this? Now, how do we do this, right? Will urban local bodies, so all this effort will be led by the city's urban local bodies, correct? But the audience that you will be training, a lot of them will be probably people from the health department, people from the women and child department, Anganwadi. So how do we start making sense of who will collect this data and how? So essentially, at the core of this will have to be the city government, right? So if it is Kochi or if it's Ahmedabad or it's Jaipur, Udaipur, Bhubaneswar, the local body is at the center, and then the local body has to kind of collaborate with a variety of other stakeholders to start kind of collecting this data and start developing a dashboard. Who do they have to collaborate with? First and foremost, they have to collaborate with other departments, right? So if it's the local government, and then the local government needs data on all Anganwadis in the city, then we'll have to kind of collaborate with Women and Child Development Department to start to identify what are the Anganwadis, where they are. If we need data about air pollution in the city, probably there'll be an environment department at the state level, or the climate department. So the local bodies will have to start kind of collaborating with a lot of different stakeholders for secondary data, And then for some of the primary data collection, they have to organize or kind of make a system which involves the not, which can involve NGOs, CBOs, CSOs. So if there is a neighborhood, let's say there is a low income settlement that is identified as a neighborhood, can the local governments work in collaboration with the CBO in that neighborhood to start collecting some of this information, right? Or if it's an RWA, can the local government work with an RWA to start collecting some of this information? This is also a very good place to engage students, knowledge institutes, to systematically kind of develop a system of, because again, this is not a one-time exercise, right? Cities will need a system of continuously kind of getting and analyzing this data. Where can can students be employed on a regular basis to make sure that some of these indicators are get? Students, urban planners, designers are very good, especially for some of the finer when we have to collect nuanced data which is qualitative. We will need people who are very good at asking questions, right? Who are very good facilitators, who will extract the kind of data that is needed. So there can be NGOs, there can be behavioral scientists who can guide. So there'll be a whole ecosystem that the cities will have to think about and develop to do this systematically. Correct. And I think as we move forward, since this is the last module of this course, which is the orientation course, in the next course, I think, which is operational, we'll get even more specific and dive deeper into how can we involve all these actors, what are the toolkits for data collection. But I think these 4 modules essentially were important to give an overall understanding, exposure to ITC, their needs, ITC data, what is the kind of data, so that cities are familiar. So this is the last slide for this presentation, and we can again do this quick interactive exercise, because these are the kind of exercises that city governments will have to do. So the idea here is we have some data indicators that we have identified based on the evaluation metrics, and then we also have the benchmark values. So we can discuss for each one of these, one, what is the data point, right? So what is the kind of data? What are the data points? Second, where will this data come from, right? So what is the source? Where will it collected? Is it collated from a secondary source? Is it primary data? Third will be, at what level are we collecting this? Is this something that we're collecting at a very broad level or a amenity level? Who is involved in stakeholder collecting this data, and also what methods will cities have to use to collect this data? So let's look at the first one: per capita organized green open space for a neighborhood. What are the data points that we need?
First, you identify number of parks in that neighborhood, get the area of the neighborhood, then you divide with the population, which we have the data from either the urban local bodies or the ward level numbers. So based on that, it will
How
be,
many
I
data
think,
points?
second bit. Yeah.
So first, you said all the parks and their area, correct?
Yes.
Where will this come from?
Secondary data.
What kind of
From
secondary
ULB.
data? From ULB. If they don't have a park database, then what can be done?
So then you should be getting general ward level map should be having these parks identified.
Okay.
So you get the basic information of their existence. Then if they don't have the data, then you have to bank upon the primary level survey. You go there and measure it and find out the area of the park. Then you identify that particular neighborhood, look into the population.
Correct.
Subdivide it.
Subdivided. Now for the first, I think exactly this is what cities will have to do. They'll have to look at secondary databases. Is there a parks database? If not, then one intermediate step could also be, you can also use Google Earth imagery, etc., to identify parks, right? You don't need to all the time make physical visits, but they'll have to figure out some way, either mapping or visits, to identify all the parks, identify a neighborhood. Where will the neighborhood population come from?
Ward level? The
But we are doing it at the neighborhood level, right? So how do we identify the population at the neighborhood level?
census.
Census will not give you population at a neighborhood level. It will give you at the ward level. Any ideas on that?
RWS.
Hmm?
RWS perhaps.
RWA, yes. So if it's a neighborhood, like I gave an example of a Jain society, if it's identified neighborhood, then absolutely you can work with RWS to find out. Oh, mere, there are 500 bugs. Population. So you will this. So cities will have to either engage with RWAs or use, some. I think census block tak jata hai population, but in urban areas we also don't have, very, that delineation. We only get sometimes the population at the ward level. So you will have to do. Sometimes we'll also have to do primary surveys, based on number of housing, buildings, some estimates to arrive at the population. Let's look at the second one, percentage of streets with adequate lighting. इसमें क्या-क्या data points लगेंगे?
Secondary data from the electricity department where they have these points of light poles.
Correct.
And you cross-check either again RWA or your primary source. So you will find out how many street poles for electrical supply and also how many street poles with the lighting provision.
Lux, and then you also need, essentially that will not give you, let's look at the indicator again. The indicator is percentage of streets with adequate lighting, right? And if we look at thriving indicator, it says 100% of street area with adequate lighting facilities with 8 lux. That means at any point on the street, if I'm walking, there is minimum 8 lux of lighting available. So there are ways to measure lighting. I'm sure electrical department will have, there are, lux meters. So there are, certain nuances that cities will have to understand, because the electrical poles, we will only get the number of electrical poles, right, and lighting. Now maybe there is a formula that it says that if there are 2 poles so many meters apart, that means that whole area is lit. So we'll have to, cities will have to think through, derive those things, and arrive at these indicators. The third one is percentage of creches within accessible 500 meter distance from housing cluster. How will we do this?
So there will be public owned creche and private owned creche also.
Yes, could be.
Then again, ULBs or RWS are the main source of getting the information. And once you map on the plan, neighborhood level or ward level, then you would be understanding, like, are they really 500-meter radius? Are they intersecting or not? Are they away?
Correct. Right. So we are already seeing that
exercise.
It's a planning exercise, and we are already seeing that a lot of this can't be done without the involved. Have a lot of these stakeholders to start collecting and analyzing this data. The household level coverage of SWM services through door-to-door collection. Where will we get this data from?
This data is available with the ULBs. ULBs
Yes.
Normally they have this door-to-door collection, daily door-to-door collection system. So most of the ULBs will have this data.
I did the Swachhata Sarvekshan and the SLB benchmarks, right? So this is something that the ULBs will have, that whether the cities have 100% collection or so these are the ULBs. So these were just some examples of, and this exercise, I think it's also important when you work with cities and when you train cities, take a few examples of indicators and then think, we can ask the cities, do they have this information? Where will they collect this information from? So that can also help them to think, about where and how can they start this process of systemic data collection. There are a few more, one more we can take. Let's take this one, percentage of municipal budget allocated for open spaces or parks.
Yeah, the data will also be there with the municipality only. I mean,
It will be with the municipality. So if there is an allocation of 200 or 100 crores with a budget of 1,000 crores, then what percentage would it be? If it is more than 5%, it's thriving. If it's between 1 to 5%, it's thriving. But if a city doesn't even have a budget item, dedicated budget item for open spaces, parks, or it's less than percentage, then it indicates that the city needs to do better in that domain, right? So similarly, there are a lot of these indicators. Let's look at this one, community based organizations deliberately inviting women to planning meetings and delivering recommendations to ULB. This is, I think, under the social services element. How can we get this information? Whether community-based organizations are inviting women to planning meetings and delivering recommendations to ULB.
I think the NGOs take a major role of these kind of exercises. The Dwakra groups in the rural areas. These are the women-oriented groups.
Correct.
Generally would.
I think the city mission managers of the National Urban Livelihood Mission will be also having this sort of a data.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, see, that's another very good convergence. A lot of cities have NULM, these self-help groups under NULM which are being formed. So some of those self-help groups can be involved under NULM, and some of this data can also be collected from the National Urban Livelihoods Mission. Exactly. So a lot of this data can also be, like we all discussed, will come from kind of synergies with all these, whether it's NULM, cities. I'm just going to end here, and then we can have general questions. What did we essentially, what is this module about? So essentially, let's just look at key considerations. Cities have to have clarity on all indicators, right? So when we move forward with this ITCN, that there are 5 objectives that these indicators are meeting, and then there are 5 elements, that are for which these indicators are being collected. What is the level of measurement? We are kind of, once we identify all of them, we are kind of looking at the source of data. Will this data come from NULM? Will this data come from smart cities? To collect this data, right? We are going to do it as an yearly exercise, or we are going to do pre and post. So things like that. What is the reliability of measurement? Very often, we collect. It's also a good practice. I think some of you will indicator, right? That how reliable we think is this data. Who is going to collect this data? If we are indicators, are we properly classified? Measurement, cities will have to take into these key considerations, right? Just to recap again, performance measurement is not new, right? In the last 5-8 years, it has gained a lot of popularity. We are using performance measurement across sectors, from sanitation to transport, to a lot of different sectors. So now it's for cities to use that understanding to extend that to developing a performance measurement kind of a framework for ITCN, correct? And essentially also use this data systematically to guide decision making, right? So certain cities data will tell you, what decision to take, what decision to prioritize. And essentially the second concept that we want cities to understand, I think, which was very clear from this discussion, is convergence. Talk about data convergence. What data will come from NULM? What can come from Smart Cities mission? What can be done through WCD? Where can we invite the RWAs? So how do we prioritize data convergence? And then the last one, because we are looking at a special group, which is how do we involve them, right? How do we involve the caregivers themselves in collecting this data, in making sense of this data, in understanding this data, and also helping the cities make decisions based on this data, right? So those were the broad concepts that I wanted to highlight, and that also ends this orientation modules course. We had 4 modules. Second one, we looked at elements. Yesterday, Avnish spoke about, what are the different policy initiatives, from master plans to TP schemes to local area plans, where this can be plugged in, where we can synergize with these missions. And today's module was essentially about that. How do we look at data? What is the performance measurement for more evidence-based decisions, right? So that this is the key reference. I think this will have been shared with you, or I think we will share with you once again with this module, so you can also go into detail in this. So I'll just stop my presentation there, and if we have any questions, we can take. Thank you, everyone.
I have one inquiry, one maybe rather question.
Yes.
What about the role of a social structure when we look into the availability of open space to particular neighborhood or particular park? And we have not indicated that into our kind of research or ITCN framework or indicator, because social structure also makes a difference of how the people would react, or ITCN caregivers or toddlers would react, because if there is a difference of those social structures, so people would not interact or people would not go. We can see these kind of very tangible actions can be observed. So how do we tackle, or how do we address these kind of these kind of issues in this kind of talk, if somebody asks about it?
Correct.
Because social structure and the economic disparity, like income group, and also the religious oriented, also people would feel at different locations, different cities, different people would react to given open space particular neighborhood. So personally I have seen it. So, and also I think maybe that can be raised so that we can discuss on it, and how we can break the barrier, or how we can design that kind of space, and what kind of role AULB or the RWS can get into. Maybe those also may need to be discussed.
Yes. So I think very briefly, I think, point is absolutely relevant. So I think first and foremost, cities need to understand that this framework for ITCN is absolutely based on the behavior and the evidence that we are collecting from a particular group and neighborhood, right? So for example, based on the social structure, like you said, a particular group in a neighborhood has certain behavioral patterns, right? Of gathering, of should guide the decision about what kind of intervention should happen in that neighborhood. So just to give you an example, I think few years back, I think it was either part of an Aga Khan project or something in Delhi, right? I think it was popular that there was a women's only park, which was developed in a neighborhood in Delhi. Because after research, though we would all like to say that parks need to be inclusive, right? The more the number of people come from different genders, from age groups, that makes, but we can't change social structures, but we can design and develop interventions based on what we are seeing and what is the research that is telling us. So a lot of the indicators here also at the general framework for ITCN says that it should be driven by the behaviors, the kind of usage patterns of a particular group, right? Then it's also the second way is also the behavior change communication that Purvi presented on day one, I think, right? That certain things will need a nudge. You will have to change behaviors over a longer period of time, like civic consciousness, not littering. All of these are sometimes, will need some push, and you can also design interventions to nudge that. But just I think it's a important topic to discuss, and it has to be tailored to the needs of a particular neighborhood, what the interventions are. Any other questions, or we can just take a brief poll here then, a feedback.
Are there any various methods of these surveys? For example, in your presentation in the graphics, you have shown red dots and blue dots and all those. So apart from that, are there any various methods of notifying these surveys or the site visits, or any other methods you would recommend? If any, I think you got to share it.
Yeah, we will provide references, but I think I'll also ask Hepzibah to share. If I understand the next level of course, which is the operational course, there will be a lot more details shared on data toolkits, gathering data, how to represent. Hepzibah.
Yes, absolutely. To also complement what Vani ma'am just said, we are also going to come out with data baseline, which would feature in-depth assessment and rapid assessment for city officials to take up. And these are some of the tools and mechanisms that will be incorporated in the next set of trainings, and for you especially, from which can be further shared to ULB. So right now, I think we are also trying to set a fundamental pace of how do we start the conversation with ULBs on incorporating this lens. So I think that is where the orientation course is. I think by now everyone is well versed on how to access Mentimeter. So I would request everyone to please join scan the QR code or go to the website and enter the code. It is the last session for the orientation course training, so I would request that everyone participates, and if in case there are any questions that you might have which might not have been answered so far, would request that you should definitely post them right away in this session. Yeah, thank you so much.